Needle felting in conservation, a skills workshop by Seren Kitchener. What is needle felting? Needle felting is a craft or skill involving the use of a barbed needle and wool roving. The barbs of the needle work by capturing the woolen fibres, agitating them, and causing the scale-like surfaces of them to interlock with one another, resulting in the wool becoming denser the more frequently it is agitated with the needle. This is used in craft projects, but in conservation it is slowly becoming a more recognised method of treatment for repairs in taxidermy and woolen textiles, as shown here. In conservation, Japanese tissue paper is widely used for paper conservation, but also to replicate fur in taxidermy conservation. This involves multiple steps of slowly building up the paper to create a fur-looking texture that can be applied to the object. Needle felting is used to produce similar results, but can also be utilised in the conservation of woolen objects such as clothing. The plus sides of needle felting is that it isn't a hard skill to pick up, making it accessible to a lot of people yet effective at the same time. Not only this, but it's easily reversible, which is an ideal quality for a treatment in conservation. What equipment will you need? You will need a barbed needle. Multiple is often good. You only need one to do the felting, however needles breaking isn't uncommon, so it's good to have backups. You will also need a backing material such as rime. Rime is acid-free, which is important when using on a historic object, as you don't want to introduce anything that will further damage the piece. It's also stable during humidity changes. There is a hope that objects will be stored at a reasonable relative humidity with little fluctuation, but having this as a buffer at least means it is a case of being better safe than sorry. Using a backing material also makes it easier to remove from the object if needed, and stops the need for needle felting the wool directly onto the taxidermy or object, which would ultimately damage the skin or original material. You will also need polyethylene foam, which can be found as a packaging material, but also available from online retailers, as well as often being incorporated as part of needle felting kits. This is used as a cushioning. The needle will need to go straight through the wool and backing material to ensure all barbs have caught fibres and interlocked with them. To enable the needle to be stabbed far enough, a foam pad is needed beneath your work. This also stops the needle from hitting the surface below, such as the table, and ultimately snapping. Dependent on how often you use the polyethylene pad for needle felting, you may need to replace it every so often, as over time the needle moving through the pad will cause it to become thin and less rigid, meaning your needle is more likely to hit the workbench below. You will also need wool roving, which is wool that has been combed and drawn out to create sections of wool where the fibres are all going in the same direction. It's essentially what wool looks like before it is spun to create yarn for knitting. It can be left in its natural colour or dyed to make brighter colours. Other optional equipment is a pair of needle felting scissors, which often come in packs you can buy from retailers such as Amazon or Hobbycraft. These aren't essential, but can be useful to help remove smaller flyaway fibres of wool and to create a smoother look overall. How to needle felt for conservation. You first need to collect your materials together before cutting out a section of the backing to the right dimensions of the area you want to fill, as shown. You then decide on your wool. Roving wool can be bought in many different artificial and natural colours, many of which replicate that of common animal fur. They are, however, often in block colours, for example, brown, grey, and white, as shown here. Animal fur, like human hair, tends to be a combination of varying shades and colours. To achieve this in needle felting, you can use blending tools such as carding paddles. These allow you to place the different colours on the paddles and brush them against one another to combine the furs. I don't have one of these to hand, but it can effectively and easily be carried out by just placing the colours together and pulling and tearing the wools, slowly combining them, as shown here. Once you have the desired look and colour, you simply sort the amount of wool you want to use. It may be a good idea to start with a smaller section and slowly build up. You then place this wool onto the backing material and grab your needle. Carefully stab the needle into the wool repeatedly, moving around the section as you go. This will cause the woolen fibres to interlock, whilst also attaching the wool to the rime below. Repeat this until you can clearly see the fibres have become denser and formed more of a shape. Here you can see the wool is denser on the backing material where the root of the faux hair follicles are being created, compared to the untouched lengths of the hair. You may then want to add another section to the needle felt infill to slowly build up the look of fur. Simply carry out the same process as before. On smaller infills, where things are a bit more fiddly, you can acquire small leather covers to go on your fingers to reduce the risk of injury. These too often come in pre-made packs. Again, here we can see the process of needle felting has caused these fibres to interlock, allowing them to be securely held to the backing material. If we look at the back of the remake, you can clearly see where the woolen fibres have started to be pierced through. It is important to consider what sort of texture you are going for. For example, is the animal you are working on long-haired or short-haired? To create a shorter-haired look, the wool needs to be felted more to create a denser look by making the fibres bind to each other further. Alternatively, a longer hair look will likely require more felting toward what would be the root of the hair and be left relatively untouched towards the end. For example, here we have an infill for a longer haired taxidermy. Similar to the one just being made, you can see the root where the wool is attached to the remate is far denser than the wool left to make the ends of the hair. Alternatively, here we have a small infill patch for either a short haired taxidermy or similar, possibly even woolen clothing. What's interesting here is that the two sides of the needle felting have different textures, so you can achieve different looks. The first side is dense and smooth, perhaps making it more suited to use on a woolen jacket. The flip side is fur-like and could be better suited to a short-haired taxidermy. Here is a faux taxidermy as if there were a patch of fur missing from the specimen. I've done the main fur in grey coloured wool, but the infill will be in white so you can clearly identify it for the purposes of this workshop. As previously stated, you need to cut your remade to the correct shape of the infill before needle felting the wool to the desired length, texture and style as already done. This piece is then placed into the gap on the taxidermy. As it is a long-haired piece and the fibres of the wool and backing support naturally catch onto the surrounding wool, or fur, then you can simply leave the piece here without the need for adhesive. If, however, the infill doesn't naturally hold itself there, or the piece is perhaps going to be handled, then you can apply a small amount of adhesive to the back of the remake to help secure it in place. As you can see, the infill holds itself nicely in place even when being jostled around. As previously mentioned, it is a very reversible treatment. Particularly if you haven't used any adhesive on the piece, you can simply gently remove the infill and redo another, spruce up this one, or in the future a new treatment method may be chosen entirely. The reversibility of this method gives conservators the freedom to do just that. That's the brief overview of how needle felting can be used in conservation, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I've attached the reading carried out for this project, so feel free to take a look at those if you want to learn more about this up and coming technique. Thank you!